Welcome everybody to this another webisode here on OG55. Today we are talking about NDEs, near-death experiences, and the afterlife. I got a fantastic panel with me today. I have OG, the man himself, George the Italiano. I have Tonez Papi, and I also have Sexy Slimer. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for joining.
I'm not Sexy Tones, bro. What was that?
Bro, Tonez Papi, bro.
I want sexy in front of it though.
Hey, Tones, I actually, real quick, not to digress too far, but I loved you posted a story, I think it was yesterday, where you said, hey, even a gangster needs a forehead kiss.
Yeah, for sure, right?
A gangster needs a forehead kiss.
Hell yeah.
I think it's pretty much to say that we're all sexy motherfuckers.
Deal.
Absolutely.
But anyways, guys, so thank you so much for joining me. So I just want to go around real quick before we react to this video for this near-death experience. OG, George, Tonez, Slimer, are you guys interested in this topic? Like, do you guys think about the afterlife often? Like, what's your thoughts? OG, you go first, then we'll go to George.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, this is a topic I'm very, very interested in. I love this kind of like stuff that kind of gets your mind going, your imagination going. Anything with the afterlife, these kind of experiences, what's out there, love it. I'm the same way with like the universe and what's beyond Earth and our galaxy, and I just love this stuff, man. And it's like just the possibility of like what to expect, and I don't know. I've been into this stuff for years and years and years, and this is a topic that I've done a lot of. I don't want to say research. I haven't done research on it, but like I've watched a lot of content about this stuff. So it's something that really, really does interest me quite a bit. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it, man. This is gonna be a fun conversation.
Hell yeah, George the Italiano, sir. What do you think?
I think it's fascinating to hear, people's stories, of non-believers then believing in something and what their experiences are. I mean, I personally don't wake up every day thinking, oh, I wonder how it's going to be like when I'm dead. It's like you don't really want to think of that stuff because you just like, you're in the moment. But it is a fascinating topic to kind of look into because it does open up the possibilities of like, what is it, when you see like in the afterlife. So yeah, I'm very curious. I've talked about this stuff before, but maybe not as in depth. But with a stacked panel like this, I think it's going to be a very interesting show.
Absolutely. Slimer, now we know that, you were in the military. I know that there has been, looking into the literature, there has been some stories from people in combat who have had NDE. So what's your thought on the whole phenomenon?
Well, it's an interesting subject that I think you could probably study for the rest of your life for the simple fact that we don't even understand consciousness. Like we can't even put a definition on it. It's something that we've been studying for thousands of years, and it isn't until very recently that we've been able to put consciousness into definitions that people actually agree on. And even then we have like different categorizations of what consciousness is. And that extrapolates into bigger questions like what happens in the afterlife. Because if we don't know what consciousness is, and it's going to become very difficult to answer more complex questions like what happens once consciousness goes away, So there's a lot of different schools of thought when it comes to like what happens to your brain or your soul. Do you have a soul? Is the brain the soul? There's a lot of ways that we try to categorize these different problems. It's a very complex problem. I don't think we even know what the answers are. All we can really do is take people's experiences, take them at face value. There's no reason to assume that they're lying to us. They are giving us a description of the quality of their life and their experiences, and we have to assume that they're telling the truth. And then hopefully a combination of like biology, physics, philosophy, and biochemistry, we can try to come up with an explanation as to what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Tonez, have you heard of NDEs before? Have you ever looked into like the stories or the research of this? Do you think about the afterlife at all?
I mean, as far as looking into, no. I've heard and seen, some accounts of people experiencing, the bright light that comes out, everything like that. And, it's fascinating. Those stories are very fascinating. This kind of topic is, essentially taboo to some people, or some people who talk about these situations that they've been through. It's almost like some people don't like hearing about it, and some people do. Some people think it's fascinating. Some people think this person's crazy for thinking they saw, the pearly gates or whatever the case may be. So to me, this kind of topic it's interesting, because you don't know what's going on. We don't know what happens after our life. And I'll say this, when it comes to me thinking about, I guess, death or what's after, I'm not really the type of person who fears what's going after. I just fear what my death will happen to, what my death will affect to other people, or how it will affect other people. I'm a very family oriented person. I love my family, I love my friends, and that's very, important to me. So knowing that how much I'm loved and my death will do to people, that's what I fear. But as far as what's next, I don't fear that. And a lot of people do. They unfortunately they live life in a bubble and don't like to leave the house when it comes to, so it's very interesting, this topic, for that reason of what could be next. You know what I'm saying?
100%.
Absolutely. Well, OG, shall we get started with the video, good sir?
Let's dive right in. Here we go. We're going to start. She has an experience where it kind of gets into how she passed away. We're going to kind of skip over that, kind of get into the more the afterlife story. And this is actually courtesy of the YouTube channel Coming Home. Make sure you all subscribe to them. Amazing content. Smash that like button. I will be linking it down below. But atheist dies and finds there is life after death. Here we go. And gentlemen, if there's anything you want me to pause it, we'll talk about it, and just let me know. Just say, hey, OG, pause it, and
I do have a question. Is there a reason why we're starting at 8 minutes?
Well, because she just kind of gets into how she died. So I just want to get into the meat and potatoes of like what happened once she does. Yeah.
It was just so painful. And that's when I realized I was in pretty bad shape. So they brought me to the trauma center. I had a head injury. I had the cracked collarbone, 5 ribs that were broken in multiple places. I had a collapsed lung, but the main damage was really to my neck and my back. The doctor basically said, well, every process in your back is cracked, and you've got major damage to your neck vertebrae and then your lower back vertebrae. So they called in a surgeon who decided that he could fix it. He was going to go in there, clean up all of the broken bits, and then put titanium rods up and down my back on either side of my spine. And that surgery was scheduled for the Monday after this accident. So like 3 days later. I had an unbelievable fear of death coming up to this. That was the biggest fear of my life, was the fear of death. I was absolutely mortified by that one fear. It paralyzed me in so many ways. So going into this surgery, I was really scared and almost had myself convinced that I wasn't going to make it. They were wheeling me in. They got me moved onto the operating table. The anesthesiologist came up, and, as soon as he administered it, within like 3 seconds, I was, drifting off. In a normal surgery that I've had a few before, it was just gray nothingness, and then they were waking me up in the recovery room. This time I drifted off, and I was even more awake than I was before the anesthesia.
Weird.
And it was that moment that I realized.
So I haven't had like major surgery before. The only thing I have had was like my wisdom teeth pulled out, and then they actually put me under anesthesia for that. So I was asleep, and I know what she's describing. Like when you go under, Like I was awake 1 second, and then the next thing I know, I'm waking up like in pain. Like I felt no sense of drifting off. I felt no sense of like falling asleep. It was just I'm awake 1 second, and then I'm waking up like in fucking pain.
Yeah.
So, okay.
No, that's pretty much what if you have a good anesthesiologist, that's pretty much that's the only thing that you should experience is like you're sitting there and waking up when it's done. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I had a messed up experience though. Back in 2017, I almost died because my appendix burst. And the ER, I kept going back to the ER like day after day because I was vomiting and like all kinds of stuff. And it was getting worse every day, worse and worse and worse. They kept telling me it's just the flu. I'm like, yeah, but the flu doesn't get worse every single day. I felt more than just a stomach flu. Sure enough, after like the 4th day, I couldn't even like hold my bowels. I was like literally shitting the bed, right? And this was in 2017. So the doctor at the ER was like, no, we got to get you into a CT scan. So they do the CT scan, and I have all these blockages in my stomach, in my intestine, right? And they're like, he's like, there's all kinds of blockages, but we don't even know what it is. So we got to do emergency surgery in the morning. So I'm like, oh shit, it could be anything, right? So I'm like stressed out, feeling like crap. They put a tube in my mouth to drain me, the whole thing. Anyway, long story short, the day of the surgery, dude, I go in there and they give you a muscle relaxer and then whatever it is to knock you out, right? The muscle relaxer kicked in like 30 seconds or 40 seconds before I was knocked out, bro. So I literally was awake, fully conscious, and couldn't even move my eyelids. I was like trapped in my body, dude. I couldn't tell them that I was still awake. I couldn't talk. I couldn't move. The most terrifying experience, like probably, honestly, yeah, probably the most terrifying experience I've ever been through. Just being trapped in your body like that and not being able to move or say anything was terrifying. And then I was out, and then I woke up when it was done. But
that's exactly what it feels like when you have one of those. What are those nightmares called? The ones where you see the witch. What was that? Sleep paralysis. Yeah, it sounds exactly like sleep paralysis. I've had that several times, and it's frightening. It's literally frightening. I've seen figures during my sleep paralysis, and I don't want to detract from this too far, but I've seen some figures. I've actually had what looked like a witch, like basically like the girl from The Ring, crawling on my chest and just sitting on me.
Dude,
my eyes wide open. I've also seen the man with a hat, which is another common figure that people see during sleep paralysis. I've seen quite a few crazy things, but I've had them. So I don't want to say I get them often, but I've had them often enough that when it happens, I can like tell myself, okay, you're in sleep paralysis. You're going to see some things, ignore it, and then it'll eventually go away. But yeah, when you can't move, it's frightening because all of your primitive self-defense mechanisms kick in and you can't control them. And I'm pretty sure G can test that. Like it's a freak out mode that is just beyond anything.
Yeah, you're freaking out internally, but you literally can't, like your body isn't moving, isn't doing anything. It's terrifying, absolutely terrifying. So it was kind of crazy because when I got my colonoscopy, yeah, boys, I got my colonoscopy.
I got mine last month.
Slimer and I, man, let's go. I got a colonoscopy and I had an endoscopy too. And I thought the endoscopy, like the little tube they put in your throat, the camera thing or whatever, I thought it was like maybe like the width of like a straw. So I told him like, you know what, dude, I don't need the fucking anesthesia because I had the bad experience already. Just like fucking put some numbness or whatever and just put that shit in. I had the tube in my throat for the appendix thing, which was a pretty thick, tube. So I'm like, I can handle the endoscopy. That's all good. Man, he hits the back of my throat. I'm like, I'm like, yeah, just fucking knock me out. Just fucking knock me out. You won.
Something really
George, no gag reflex joke.
No, I was waiting for it.
Joke.
I was close. I was close.
Yeah.
So like you got your math skills, bro. You got to work on that.
You know what I'm saying?
Hey, LG, are you sure that wasn't Dr. George? That was in over there?
Oh, God.
I hope not.
Now we're gonna put some RCA cables in now. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Oh man.
I woke up, and what I'm looking around at is this beautiful hillside. It's sort of like in a meadow, so there's low grass and flowers all around me. But I'm on the hillside looking out over a series of rolling mountain ranges. And I thought, well, this is kind of a cool hallucination. I could do this while I'm in surgery. The first thing I noticed was this wave of peace. It felt like, standing in front of a fireplace when the fire is on and that heat kind of coming through you. It felt like I was being hugged. But there was this big moment of feeling acceptance and really just unconditional love coming into me. And it was powerful. And that's when I knew something was not right. And I thought, oh my God, I died. I thought I died. I remember being in surgery. And at that moment, I felt love. I thought, I must have died on the operating table. The second thought, now here's my analytical science mind still kicking in.
Well, and
wait.
And here's the thing that's crazy, right? And Slimer, you touched upon this about consciousness, right? Mm-hmm. We really don't know anything about consciousness, in my opinion, like barely anything. The fact that she's having this kind of experience when she's technically dead, and she has her analytical science mind and all that stuff, shows you consciousness goes well beyond just the brain. And almost to the point where Ebba, we were talking about this on the phone the other day, where I almost feel, and I'm curious what you guys think, I almost feel like the brain is a filter. Like it almost restricts consciousness. Like it's almost like you're more aware. It seems like when I hear all these NDEs, these experiences, I feel like people get more aware when they lose their brain, their physical brain, and that soul or consciousness is able to kind of just go nuts, right? What do you think about that, Slimer? I mean, do you think there's some maybe some truth to that or not, or like where the brain is sort of kind of like holding it back almost?
I don't think it's holding it back. What I think is that biology has risen out of quantum. I think let me back up a little bit. I think that consciousness precedes biology. So in other words, I don't think that consciousness is emergent from material. I'm not a materialist in that sense. I'm more open to the mindset that the physical world has manifested out of consciousness itself. And while that sounds like spooky religion, there's actually a really interesting theory I've been reading up on for the last couple of years. It's still a hypothesis, but it's a very strong hypothesis, which has a lot of evidence, although there are some detractors. But it's simply called the orchestrated objective reduction theory. And that's a theory that has been first posited by Sir Roger Penrose, who's a Nobel
Peace Prize.
Yeah, he's a Nobel laureate for physics, and there was an anesthesiologist that he collaborated with called Stephen something. But anyways, the idea is that there's tiny particles inside your brain called microtubules, and they use weird quantum physics rules, like particles being in two states at once, to process information. The orchestrated part means that these tiny quantum events are organized together to make consciousness happen. And that this basically a fancy way of saying that quantum stuff collapses into definite states, and that collapse is what produces a moment of awareness. Or in other words, it's not that consciousness is quantum fluctuations, but rather that when the quantum fluctuations collapse in these microtubules, which you have all throughout your body, microtubules are actually the framework which make up all the little organisms in your body. And you've actually seen one. So if you ever actually saw like that amino peptide or whatever it was walking on what seemed to be like a strand of something, you guys have seen that, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that's a microtubule. They're all throughout your body. But there's quantum fluctuations in them. And the idea is that because of the way that quantum fluctuations collapse, that collapsing moment happens at what's called like terahertz, so trillions of times per second. And so consciousness arises or emerges during those quantum collapses into reality. And so consciousness percolates out of the quantum field in your brain is basically, I mean, that's like a really dirty, rough way of explaining this theory, but it's the one that I'm most interested in because it goes way beyond just like neural synapses, like neural synapses and saying that the brain is just like a biological computer. I just don't think those are good explanations. We don't think in ones and zeros. Our memory and our computational ability and the way that we analyze things, it's more on a quantum level versus just like neural synapses doing things. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But also too, Slimer, with this, not only is she, I guess, technically dead, but also she's under general anesthesia, which that should make it doubly impossible for her to have a conscious experience in the first place.
Wait, one question to you, real quick. You got. She said that she felt dead, or she thought she was dead. How do we know she was physically dead?
That's what I was going to say, because the fact that she says that she thought in that instance, oh, I died on the operating table, which means, to my understanding, now again, I'm just going by like what my thoughts and opinions are. We all don't know what's going to happen, once it's our time. But when you're automatically thinking of what transpired you to put you in that position, could you really then consider yourself fully dead? Because from my understanding, because I've watched many different things, and it seems like there's like different layers of what's considered as officially dead.
That's true.
Well, but that's the thing too, is that if you watch Dr. Sanfarnia, he talks about like what's the official definition of death, right? Because we get into a state where we are reviving people, more and more at periods of times that they died.
Because
right?
there's a movie based off of the true life story. And again, I'm just going by like whatever person's background is of like what they believe and everything. I'm just saying of what it is. It's a movie called Heaven is for Real. And it's the story, I forget the young boy's name, where he actually goes to heaven. He meets his dead unborn sister. He got to meet his, I think it was either his grandfather or his great-grandfather, and how he looked when he was in his military outfit when he comes back. But from what I understood of what the story was, while the boy was on the operating table, because he had, I think, issues with his appendix, he never really officially died. He still had a heartbeat. He still had a pulse, but they just couldn't wake him up. But yet he got to know everything in detail of information that he never knew about his family, but yet he still had a heartbeat. So is that the consciousness kicking in? Because from what I understand too, we only use a very small percentage of our brains.
So George, I want to kind of go into this, right? I see what you're saying. With the NDEs, right? There are different like aspects of this, right? And an aspect of that is the out of body experience. So a lot of stories you read, there was one I read where the guy, I think he was like paragliding or parasailing, and he didn't actually die. But what happened was, I think there's certain consciousness experience states that happen where you do have an out of body experience that your body could be leading to death, because he fell out from like hundreds of feet up or something, and like he watched himself fall down to the ground. Now, technically he wasn't dead at that time, but I think certain cases they can have that happen. There's a board certified orthopedic spinal surgeon. Her name is Mary Neal. She described her experience where she had drowned underwater in a kayaking incident. Her definition of death was when the spirit or consciousness leaves the physical body.
Right.
So that was her definition of death, because now your essence, the being, is outside the shell.
Right.
Now, with this case though, did they pronounce her dead, like the doctors and stuff, or she just felt in that state she was in, she felt like she was dead?
Yeah,
That's
she
the part
felt
I'm
like
confused about.
Yeah, basically, she felt like based on what because she knew going in, she was going on for the surgery, and she was going under anesthesia. But yeah, she's having this kind of fantastic odyssey, very conscious, very aware. So feeling all this like unconditional love. So she's kind of at this point assuming, okay, I was going in for surgery, I was under anesthesia, and now I'm having this like visual odyssey and crazy experience. Okay. I must have passed away, so okay. Yeah, it's kind of her assuming it, but like, based on what
but they never said, like, the doctors, that she flatlined, they had to bring her back, nothing of that.
I don't believe they get into that in this video.
We'll find out. She'll probably tell us.
Yeah,
I don't remember, but there are other stories where people have flatlined and they actually see themselves in their corner watching the
and that's what I was saying. Like, it seems like there's like different variations of like what people consider as like an out of like a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience, because there's like many different layers, because there's times where a person does flatline. There's a time where you don't, but you see like your life flash before your eyes, or you see like these images and you think that you're dead, but then you're really not, but you're telling yourself this. So that means the subconscious is kicking in. So it's like, yeah, so there's many different layers of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anesthesia also causes, real quick, I just want to say this last part.
Sure.
Anesthesia also causes hallucinations in older people. Now, they usually call that post-operative delirium, but she might have a certain reaction to anesthesia that causes her to hallucinate while she's rendered unconscious before she wakes up from an operation. So that's a possibility too.
That's a possibility, but Slimer, also I've heard that hallucinations generally are more frightening than not. Is that true?
No, not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
My grandmother had hallucinations, and it wasn't anything scary, but it was just more like when she was on a certain medication before her passing, like she would see like images on the walls where it would be of like meadows and like the sunshine in the sky and everything. So it was very tranquil to what her description was.
So, okay, so my question is, though, would images be different? Well, I guess not be different, but from what the experience it sounds like for her, it's a very kind of lifelike where everything is in a sequential order and you're in the moment in that area, right? So whereas instead of like seeing, images or faces on a wall or something, you're actually in this totally different place. So again, I don't know how the brain could play into that, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of bring that up.
Well, no, I agree. And I've seen this video, and she does kind of, I don't want to get too far ahead of us, but like she does kind of get into a certain situation that happens during this experience that she wouldn't have any way of knowing that, like through a hallucination, is what I'm trying to say. And I'll pause it when it gets to that point, but there's an interaction she has with a family member, or had with a family member, that she kind of experiences in this afterlife that she wasn't even aware of until after she came back, which a hallucination for me would be something that your brain would have to have a knowledge of, and then it can play with that. But this was something that happened outside of her awareness, but it showed up in this experience. You know what I'm saying? But she'll get to it though.
What's all this? Because first of all, I don't believe in anything. Second of all, my parents told me that you're going to go to hell because you're an atheist now. So I'm not experiencing either one of those. And that's when I really began to wonder what the heck was going on and why am I here? I asked that question in my mind, but then there was an answer to the thought I had. And the answer came kind of from around me in the atmosphere. And it was the answer of, this is your home. You're a part of me. You're a part of us. Welcome home. When it said that, welcome home, I lost it. Because I remembered. That's when it came back to me. And I knew immediately, oh my God, that life that I had on earth was just an illusion. That thing that I was doing down there on earth was really just a temporary state. And this is real. It was like so obvious. I all of a sudden saw someone kind of materialize out of fog. And she was very ephemeral, so vaguely a human. And she had what appeared to be long hair, but I was never able to see her face because it wasn't about her. It was about me learning what I needed to learn. And that's what she said. It's time for you to learn what you need to learn in order to go back and make your life one that would be worth living. And those were pretty much her exact words. And I'm like, whoa, I'm not going back there. What, are you kidding me? I am not going back to that place. She said, well, you've already agreed to go back. And I said, I was kind of going back to my younger self when I was kind of a pain to be around with my parents, because I was always challenging them. So I was challenging her, like, I don't want to go back there, and I don't remember agreeing to go back. She said, well, you did that before you were born into your life, and so let me show you. And it was this weird movie moment where, like, in the air in front of me sort of materialized almost like a movie screen. And she showed me planning my life before I was born. So in a way, the experience was sort of planned out, and I got to see that. And there was a point at which I looked behind me, and all that was behind me was fog. It was this foggy gray. Whereas in front of me, it was this really vibrant, maybe it was a forest or a canyon I was walking in or a mountain or something. But behind me, it was just gone. And I asked her about that. I was like, what's up with this? And she said, the place that you are in now is not the ultimate reality of where you're going to go. It's sort of she called it a holding place. And she said, in this place, it is your place of learning. And here, what we do is we're making this an environment that is comfortable for you to learn in. Things that you enjoy, places that make you feel comfortable, and that will allow you to learn what you need to learn.
Now, Ebba, I know you follow this stuff a lot too. You've heard of Eben Alexander, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so he was a brain surgeon. For those of you at home that aren't aware, he was a brain surgeon that actually ended up dying, had this crazy experience and came back. But the interesting thing about a lot of these NDEs are that they're not exactly the same, but they definitely have a lot of the same kind of hallmarks within the experiences. Have you noticed that too, Ebba? Where like Eben Alexander was explaining how like there were multiple levels of this afterlife. Like he'd go to one, and it was like the rolling hills and the beautiful scenery, but then he'd get elevated to this inky blackness where it was like a crazy amount of like unconditional love. I'm noticing that with a lot of these, where like she's talking kind of about this about a very similar thing, where like she's in the green grass, beautiful tree area, holding area, similar to what Eben Alexander was in. Yeah. So there's a lot of consistencies. Like each experience is slightly different, but at the same time, they hold a lot of like similarities. Do you notice that when you?
Yeah, so it seems like that each experience is pretty much, because here's the thing, like all of us, we all live here on Earth, but we all have our own experience, right? But in this, it seems like that each experience is kind of a person's own experience, but every experience has the same common theme to it. They have the out-of-body experience. They meet like some type of angel or loved one, spiritual being. They see a light. They go through a tunnel or some type of passageway. And also, a lot of times in like these in between worlds, a lot of times if they're forced back or if they don't want to go back, or even if they have a choice, there's usually a type of, in the environment, there's a type of what do you call it, like a bridge or some type of defining line stating, if you go past this threshold, past this river, past this gate, you cannot come back. So Again, not everyone has that, but that is a common theme as well. And with Dr. Eben Alexander, he had his out-of-body experience, and then he was in this similar type of world, and then he was pulled out of there, out of the multiverse, and then end up in that inky blackness area.
Right, which is interesting. Yeah, I just noticed a lot of like similarities between a lot of these stories with, like you were saying, with the various tiers of heaven, so to speak, that the tunnels, the life reviews, it's similar.
Can I ask a quick question before we start?
Yeah.
And this probably question for Mike and OG, because you guys watch this more often than I'm assuming we do. But how do you guys determine when a person is full of shit telling you guys a story about their near-death experience or their out-of-consciousness experience? Because not saying she is, she's getting into detail of what she's seeing, but there's a lot of there's a lot of good storytellers out there that will fake 100%. Stories but what do you guys notice when you guys are like, okay, this dude's full of shit?
I'll tell you right now, Tones. I'll tell you right now, and I might make some people mad, but this is just, and I grew up Catholic, so don't get mad. Don't get too mad at me, y'all. Don't get too mad at me. But if the near-death experience, if the person says I'm a for example, right? Just an example. I'm a lifelong Christian, and I died, and I went up, and I saw Jesus. To me, I don't really take much. I don't put much weight into those experiences because you're kind of pushing your religion, your narrative. I'm Catholic, so I'm not like shitting on any religion. I'm just saying that, like, if you tell me you're a Christian, you died, and then you met Jesus, and everything kind of confirms what you believe, hard to believe. Her, though, she was an atheist. She didn't believe in anything. Mm-hmm. And then she comes back like her mind is blown and it changes her world. The Eben Alexander guy, the brain surgeon, he was also an atheist, didn't believe in any of it. He was a scientist, basically, who believed in just data and facts. So personally, and everyone is different, their mileage may vary, but like for me personally, I take the stories where someone doesn't have like a religious horse in the race, so to speak, like someone who's not a lifelong Christian or a lifelong whatever, like they went into that experience like completely clean slate, and then they experienced that thing. So that's kind of my measuring stick with it. And not to say that the people that were Christian or Catholic or whatever had like a BS experience. I don't know, but
okay, I'm gonna push back on that just a little bit, because with both this woman and with Alexander, as you had said, they both were atheists.
Right.
So they can have the similarities between the two, difference but similarity because of what their beliefs were on earth.
Right.
Depending on if someone was Catholic, Christian, Buddhist, what have you, they may have a completely different experience based on, again, the different layers of crossing over. Because, again, going back to the heaven is for real, the young boy did see Jesus. And when he came back, he tried to describe the depiction of Jesus. And there was another girl on the opposite side of the earth that also had a near-death experience. She had painted him.
Right.
And when it was showcased on, I think it was like a news broadcast, and he looked at it and he said, "That is who I saw." So you had two young kids on opposite ends of the earth, not even in the same country,
right,
actually depict the face of Jesus. Now, again, each to one's own belief. You know, I grew up Catholic as well. I consider myself non-denominational. You know, I still have my faith that, like, when I pass on, you know, I'm going to heaven. That's just my belief. No one has it. So I still feel like, depending on where you stand on earth is how it can depict moving forward. Because even what she was saying to what the figure told her, you're not in the ultimate, you're in a holding place.
Right. And I don't disagree with you on that. But what my mindset is this: the atheist, okay, for example, right? Now, I don't discredit like a Christian's experience, but I just question it more than the atheist. I'll tell you why. The Christian
agenda pushing.
Yes. Okay. The atheist has no agenda. The atheist isn't trying to convince you to like not believe in religion. So there's no agenda there. So if she comes back and says the opposite of what she believed going into it, I believe that more than the person who's a Christian who goes in and says, "I saw Jesus," because they're verifying their own opinion. But now the little boy, George, to your credit, I know he's legit with that. I know he's not lying or anything like that, but for me personally, if you go into it kind of,
but I think that's why, because with these two people, when they come back and they say, okay, everything that I believed was because they were non-believers. Right. So really, you can actually take the atheist and the Christian, and they actually have those similarities because the Christian already believed in that before passing. So when you take an atheist that didn't, and they kind of have that same mentality of already having non-belief, but now they do believe in something, then you can kind of say, okay, well, at the end of the day, they both kind of had the similarities. But I feel like there's more layers, and going back to the layers, I feel like there's more layers with an atheist, because it's almost like, not that they have to be convinced, but there's more travel to their journey. So they can say, okay, what now I can decide of what is in front of me. Do I believe, or do I just go back and not? And that goes by each individual person of like what they choose, if they happen to come out of it or if they happen to fully pass on. And as I said, I'm just giving my interpretation on it.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think that each person's experience is kind of customized. Not the experience, but
that's that customized. That's what I was saying, Mike, because like you could take a Buddhist and they can have a completely different like similarities, but different to what an atheist would or to what a Christian would. Right. You can take a Jewish person, you know, they may have a completely, that you could take a Jehovah's Witness, you could take a Mormon. There's so many different people in this world that I feel like that whenever they hit that holding spot, so to speak, I feel like there's similarities, but there's different interpretations based off of how they lived their life on Earth. Because even how she said of what she was describing, that we kind of pick our ways of living here on Earth before we actually were born. So it's almost like when you kind of go into the afterlife, you start moving into that full circle.
What say you, Webba? What's your measuring stick? As Tonez was asking, like, what's your measuring stick for like your barometer for like what stories you kind of believe and what stories you kind of like filter out as kind of BS?
They need to be consistent with the patterns of an NDE, and if a story sounds too fantastical, I know for some people this already sounds fantastical, but if a story sounds too okay, I'll give you an example. I read a story, and I'm like, no way, this was an NDE at all. This guy, he said he died, went to like this. Again, they all describe it like beautiful grass hills and stuff like that. But then the thing that caught me was like, wait a minute, no way. Like, I know there's animals, like people have described like horses, dogs, and cats and whatever, they're pets, right? In the afterlife. Right. However, this guy's talking about non-pets. He's like, there's tigers and lions and like all these other critters just hanging out, you know? And I'm thinking it's like a Snow White fucking thing. Like they're hanging out like in peaceful harmony on a rock by the river. And I'm like, this sounds like more like a dream, dude. Like this does not sound like like a typical like standard NDE. Because I think with NDEs, George, with the kind of customized to the experience, I do believe that they're all kind of they're all the same thing, but interpreted in a different way for the experiencer for a more comfort.
Right.
So, but yeah, if the experience sounds too fantastical, I'm not gonna believe it, because it's just like it's at that point it sounds more like a fairy tale,
right?
And especially if a person tries to say, "Oh, I died," and if their story doesn't make sense in the NDE kind of phenomenon of literature, I guess you could call it, then yeah, it's like, okay, that's a bullshit story.
So, sounds like a fairy tale.
How many more fairy tale stories about your life till we had enough?
All right, here we go.
In order to go back and make your life one that's worth living, she would teach me.
Well, only I could work a Kendrick drop into an NDE video. That's wild.
Only you, OG.
Things about not only the spiritual place I was in, but that everything was based on an energetic structure, not a physical one. Everything you see around you, it's an illusion. The more I thought about it, the more I knew it to be true.
Oh, OG, can you pause it right there?
Yeah, I got you.
So I want you guys' thoughts on this. What do you guys think about that? Because a lot of these stories of NDEs, they come back and say that this physical material world is the dream. Like when you wake up from a dream, you're like, oh shit, I know that was a dream.
Mhm.
In comparison from the NDE spiritual realm that they were in, comparing that, they're like, this is a muddy dream compared to that.
Correct. I've heard that through many people that I've read, like, their stories. Like that's the one thing that I think out of everything, they all had that in common, where we see this as the reality because this is all that we know. This is all that we remember. Right. But once we experience something like this in description, if coming back and they're describing it, that's the reality. And this is the dream.
Yeah, Evan Alexander actually talks about that. He said that spiritual realm felt more real than real, so to speak, and it felt like this. It made this reality feel kind of foggy and dreamy, and that's a consistent thing that I see a lot of NDE people say. I mean, almost every single one of them says the same thing, where it's like you feel like this is the actual reality. Like this is home. This is what your baseline is, which is crazy to me. I can't even imagine it, obviously. But what do you think about that, Slimer? What's your thoughts on that, brother?
Everything that she's saying is it's very similar to a hallucinogenic experience I had about it was 2012, so about 13 years ago. It was a very strong, very important time in my life because it was the most how can you put it? It was the most profound experience I've ever had. I ate about 3 grams of hydroponic mushrooms called penis envies, which are really potent. They're about 5 times stronger than like regular home.
I'm sorry, you put what in your mouth?
Yeah, they're called penis envies. They're that's what they're called because they look like. Anyways, but I tripped. I tripped for about 9 hours, and right when I started peaking around 7 hours, the experience was so intense. The best way I can explain it is like it brought you down to your knees. You saw God. There was no way to explain this other than like God was showering you with his love. And it was like this big aha moment. It's like I said, it's profound. And there's no way you can even begin to feel what it was like unless you've experienced it, which is why, throughout history, people have always used hallucinogens as a form of medicine and self-realization and an aligning of the mind. And now it's even proven through a lot of medical research that hallucinogens can be used to treat and cure things like PTSD, trauma related to sexual abuse, child abuse, war, and things like that. One of the things that was really interesting about that experience was in that meeting that I had with, let's call it God, because that's the only way to describe it. And what's crazy was this picture right here is very similar to it. But this picture just doesn't do it any justice. But it was something that like really brings you to your knees. And it's just like so profound that you can't do anything but like cry, because it's like if you were standing in front of the creator of the universe, and there's just nothing that can prepare you for that. Yeah, a lot of the same information was given to me. And it's weird how it's like given to you, because it's almost like given to you. Some people receive it, through dialogue. And what's funny is like a lot of times it happens from a female. Funny enough, in like different cultures, particularly like Native American and South American cultures, that's what we call her Mother Nature. Yeah, there's this idea that, the reality that we live in is a dream state. And then the real reality is somewhere beyond life. And that the one we're living is just, temporary. That's one of the big mysteries. I'm very interested in that subject. I mean, I pursued a whole degree in philosophy because of, I think that one hallucinogenic experience that I had. But really interestingly, there's no correlation between dimethyltryptamine, which is a hallucinogen, being released in your brain when you die, and these near-death experiences that people have. I mean, your brain does release a little bit of DMT, but the evidence isn't strong enough to suggest strongly that dimethyltryptamine being released in your brain at high levels is the cause of these NDEs. And so we have to resort to things like, well, it's a dump of serotonin. I mean, it could be, but serotonin in and of itself explaining like whole otherworldly experiences that tell you, consciousness, to quote the comedian, what's his name? Bill Hicks. Bill Hicks. Consciousness is just, life is just consciousness trying to experience itself subjectively. We are an imagination of ourselves, it's a pretty profound statement from a comedian, but it's so funny that so many people have come to this conclusion throughout time and history, and yet we don't understand it.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting that you took that and you had a similar experience. It's weird how do you think, Slammer, that do you think that you die, your soul left your body at one point, or do you feel like it was purely just in your physical brain? Like, do you feel like you actually crossed over, or was it purely like this kind of like hallucinating experience for you?
It's hard to say, right? So I'm agnostic. So I'm open-minded to what there is. I'm not an atheist. I think that's hubris, but I don't think that it was an out-of-body experience, but the only way to explain it was as a spiritual experience. There's no other way to explain it because it's like pure nirvana.
Wow.
But very similar to these NDEs that people have, where like it's a revelatory experience that changes their lives forever, and there's no going back. It's spiritual. Doesn't necessarily mean that it was spiritual, if you will. I mean, I'm using a descriptive word that kind of like is above. It's above an adjective to explain something. It's otherworldly, but it could have been a dopamine dump. You know what I mean?
Right.
It could have been the mushrooms, coming its way out my butthole. I don't know. Like, we don't know what it is.
Right.
And science really doesn't tell us much about it because we don't understand consciousness. I mean, consciousness, some of the best hypotheses right now tell us that, consciousness is quantum fluctuations collapsing in the microtubules in our brains. The fuck do you mean? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And this doesn't really help explain any of that.
Well, Slimer, I'm really glad you brought the whole your experience and also psychedelics. I was actually talking to OG about psychedelics a few nights ago. About how ancient cultures use psychedelics for like the rituals and whatnot. Or you also brought DMT. I know that was a very popular theory with the pineal gland, third eye. It dumps a bunch of DMT at the moment you die, stuff like that. But yeah, I haven't seen anything that says that's actually what happens in terms of the amount you would need. I've heard of people taking DMT like straight up, and they shoot out of their body. They have this whole like crazy out of body experience and stuff like that. But to your point as well is that whether these experiences are these experiences are happening, so the phenomenon's real, but whether the realities they're experiencing are real or not, I think even if it's not, what these people take away from this experiences is very transformative. Like a lot of them back. Again, this is like a 7-year period. It's just not like right away. This is a very transformative after effects that they have after having this positive or even negative experience. So even if, let's say, it's not real, they still have positive effects in their everyday life from these experiences.
That's true.
Absolutely.
Equivalent amount of time that I was out on the operating table, because I did code, my blood pressure tanked, my heart rate stopped. The flatline part lasted at most about 2 minutes.
Okay, so Tonez, she answered your question. I didn't remember that part. I didn't remember if she confirmed it, but yeah, she did flatline for like 2 minutes.
If we were to do here what I did as far as places that I traveled and things I learned, it would take about 2 or 3 months here to do that. But it also seemed like forever there. You know, it
Weird.
was a completely different experience of, quote, time. What I realized,
Which makes sense, because if you think about eternity, right? We're sold this idea that like when you die, it's eternity, right? So if you have this idea of eternity, like literally forever, if you had Earth time in that eternity experience, like that would drag, bro. like you know what I'm saying? So the time and space would have to be different to kind of do that whole thing,
But
I think.
at the same time, OG, it has to make sense still. You
Right.
know, like
Right.
like it's weird because all the events, like, because here's the thing, she's not the only experience, Tones, that she explains that other people in their experiences talk about how, you know, they did all this stuff and like that amount of time that they were like coded or dead for, you know, and it's wild. It's like, what, you had your life review, you went to like this plane of existence, you spoke to these people, and they're like yeah, it was like, it felt like years I was there, and but really I was only, you know, in the hospital for like a few hours to a couple days or whatever. You know, you're like, what? That is wild.
Bizarre. That's weird.
Reminds
Bro.
me of Interstellar. You guys seen the movie Interstellar?
Oh hell yeah, great movie.
Yeah, it reminds me of that, where they felt like they were gone for like what, a couple hours, but they were gone for like years, like fucking like 60
Reminds me of
years
my
or some
marriage.
shit.
Your marriage. Oh wait, hold on, George. Hold on. We're starting a new thing here. Hold on one sec. We have hold on.
A George ex-wife counter. Oh,
There we go. There we go.
I was just joking. Holy shit!
All right, here we go. Let's rock and roll.
from that is that it's not that time passes differently. It's that they are at the spiritual level outside of our perception of time. I went to one place where I stood there and all around me, I saw the map of my life. It was like this virtual reality map, like an old timey, you know, nautical chart laid out all around me. And I was at the center and there was this big, I think they call it a compass rose. And I'm looking all around it and there's these different pathways that I can see from one end of the map to the other. And I knew those were all of the different paths I had taken, or I should say could have taken up into this point. And then there were a lot of pathways kind of branching out from where I was, but all going back to the same place. And the point of that particular teaching was, first of all, we can take one of many paths in life, and they pretty much bring us to the same place. So it's not like there's a particular right path that you need to be on. The other part of that was I noticed that compass rose was centered figuratively in my heart area. And the point of that teaching that she finally went into that is, you know, you don't just use your brain, your human brain, to make decisions. You also have to dig deeper into what we would call intuition, or that inner knowing. And she said, balance those two out so that you're making decisions from a really holistic place rather than simply an analytical decision. Up until that point in my life, I had completely ignored that. I didn't pay that any attention at all. After that, I had what people call a life review. Now, at the time, you have to understand, I didn't know any of these terms. I didn't know about NDEs. I didn't know about life reviews. I had no idea all of this stuff. So she brought me up this kind of meandering mountain valley into what looked like a pond up in the mountains. And she said, well, I want you to kneel down by the side of the pond and just touch the surface of the pond. So I just did it. And I just sat back on kind of on my heels and just watched the surface. The ripples going out, I could see on top of the ripples, there were small little pockets all across the surface of the pond that to me looked like little videos, vignettes of specific moments in my physical life. But when I would focus on one, I was back in it. It wasn't like I was watching it from outside. I was back in it, experiencing it again from my perspective, but also experiencing it from the other people.
Okay, so this is where we hear a lot about heaven and hell, right? In classic like Christian, Catholic kind of teachings or what have you. You either go to heaven or you go to hell. In my opinion, I think this is kind of where, because a lot of people say if there's no hell, bad people don't get punished, right? I think this is where bad people get punished. So basically, in your life review, she's saying, and Webba, right? We've heard this a lot with life reviews, where you experience your life through your perspective, but also through the perspective of people that you've interacted with, right? So that's where the hell comes in. If you're a crappy person dishing out pain and hurt to other people, in your life review, you're going to feel that pain and hurt from that person's perspective. You know what I'm saying? So that's where your punishment comes in. If you're a bad person, you have all that to deal with in that life review. Not necessarily that your soul will burn in hell for eternity, but you'll have this horrible life review where you're feeling all kinds of pain and agony, which I find that kind of interesting.
For eternity? Are you saying for eternity?
No, the life review is not for eternity.
So
go ahead.
So for me, like, I mean, obviously, yeah, because I've heard of that too with the life review, that
right.
you kind of go back and, like the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, right. Just for my personal belief, because I do believe in heaven, I do believe in hell. However, I am not the person that says, oh my gosh, well, you did this, you did this, you did this, you're going to hell. I do believe that there is a certain amount of people that whatever they do, there is a place in hell for them. Because that's just my belief, but I do believe that they have to go through life review. But where I don't agree with the fact that if someone did something really bad and they get their life review, and it's like, okay, you felt what they did, okay, but you could still go into eternal glory if you happen to be like a murderer. To me, I feel like that, and again, I could be wrong because I don't know, but I'm saying based off of my belief of what, depending on the heavy layer of like what is considered as sin of my belief, goes through the life review. But as I said, I think a certain degree, for me, there is a heaven, there is a hell.
Okay, fair enough. Go ahead, Webba. I'm sorry.
Oh no, so. How should I put this? So yeah, so in the life review, like because in some experiences they pick out certain parts of their life or like the most critical moments of life. Sometimes they'll go through the entire thing, but yes, you will experience in person again from your perspective, but from the perspective of others. So like what OG was saying. And then even sometimes you might experience it even worse than how it happened in the physical world, because the nature of that reality is so much more enhanced. So not only is like, your five senses are enhanced, so any kind of hardship that was felt on earth is magnified on that next level, because right. You're not in your physical body. However, there are some hellish NDEs where people, again, I think it's like less than 10%, but they do find themselves, they wake up in like a smelly, darker than they describe darker than pitch black darkness with horror screams. They see like creatures or beings of like the most disgusting looking thing you've ever seen in your life, and they have described fire, like hot stuff. But with these stories, though, they were ultimately saved, so to speak, because they realized of their wrongdoings and asked for forgiveness. This is where like, I'm not sure how much religion plays into this, but they were saved by the divine being, whoever that may be.
And that's what I mean. Depending on like what they were doing, it was like they were giving the intervention sign of like, if you continue this path, this could possibly be where you're going, because it was like in that subconscious realm of, that's where I'm saying, like, again, I'm not saying it in a judgmental standpoint, because I'm not going to say this person deserves this, that's not for me to say. My belief is everybody will have their judgment day, again, with my belief in front of God, and he would make that ultimate decision. But as I said, to my belief, as I said, there is, for me, as there is a heaven, there is a hell.
I think based off everything I've read and heard, I'm coming just to the conclusion. Again, I have no idea. To me, hell doesn't sound like a internal place unless you're just a shitty fucking human being. But I think that if, like, let's say you get sent there, right, because you did shitty things and you're a shitty person, if you happen to then, learn to actually be a better person, I think that may be a temporarily holding spot.
Well, that's my issue, and I don't want to dive too much into this because I know people at home. I don't want to, offend anybody. But one of my biggest issues with the idea of hell forever is that it completely erases the idea that you can grow or change. Like, you have an all-forgiving God, right? We're told God is all loving, all forgiving. So the idea of hell being forever seems contradictory to him being forgiving, because he's punishing you for literally ever. You know what I'm saying? So that's my issue with the hell concept. Now, there might be hell, but maybe it's not forever. Maybe it's for, like you were saying, Ebba, they go down there for a little bit and then they come out of it or something. But the forever element of it, I feel, kind of runs contradictory to the idea of a ever-loving, like, forgiving God. So
well, in a way, yes, but I guess because since I was a person that been to church many times and I read, of my depiction, like, of my faith, because as I said, I more so go by my faith, not necessarily a religion standpoint. So I just kind of go what I believe in. But it's more than just saying if it's like an ever loving God and everything, but then also, okay, well, how, if he's ever loving, how could he send somebody, down to the pits of hell, for all an eternity? But as I said, I think it goes by a need to know basis. Now, like, for someone that says like a simple lie or something, it's like, no, he's not going to cast you, even though it's, part of the 10 commandments and everything. We all sin, we're all here on earth. That's what makes us human. We all learn from it. And I think that's what a lot of these kind of near-death experiences do see, because that's how you are able to depict, are you able to be redeemed? Are you able to see a different path? Where if you're a person that is not, and you're just, you're stuck in your ways, you're stubborn, and it's like, okay, well, then you chose your path. And I think that's where those people that you had mentioned, Ebba, that they saw fire, they saw darkness, they had those smells. It's like almost to sort of like a Charles Dickens kind of thing, like Christmas Carol, that Scrooge had to kind of see what his future was going to be if he stuck to the path that he was. Well, then when he came to, he was a changed man, sort of like in that sense. I do believe people are redeemable. I do believe in forgiveness, but I also do believe that if someone is stuck in their own ways of what their path is leading, that's essentially, it's like if you do wrong, you're not going to get rewarded with it if you're going to stick with it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I could feel everything they felt as if it was mine. And that really got to me, because there were times when I helped someone or said something nice, and I could feel that person's, for want of a better term, I could feel their spirit soar. I could feel how buoyant they felt because someone said something kind. And then it also, I could see the downstream effects of those actions too. So if I said something positive and uplifting to someone, I in turn saw how that allowed them to be more positive with other people. So this teaching was, you have an impact on the people around you, not just physically, but there's also an energetic or spiritual component to every interaction that you have, whether it's a verbal interaction, whether there's something non-spoken, it doesn't matter. Everything that you do has an impact, and therefore be more conscious of how you impact others. On the flip side, so it was balanced out for me to learn from with things that weren't so great that I did. There was a time when I was a teenager and my younger sister and I got into a fight. We fought like cats and dogs when I was a kid. We just did not see eye to eye. And I loved her, but we didn't get along very well. And there was one point when I think I was probably like 17 and she was 14. I said something not so kind to her. And I didn't think anything of it at the time. It was just a way to get her off my back. You know, I was really tired of the fight we were having. So I just said something stupid and not very nice. And she didn't react. You know, I didn't see any reaction in the moment for her, except she left. But in my review, I could feel the hurt that I caused her in that moment. And this is the second thing that always gets me. When I felt her pain at what I said to her, that was the biggest teaching moment ever. And that's the one thing I wish I could give to people was understanding viscerally how your impact affects your actions affect someone else, your words affect someone else. And in that moment, I realized, okay, I'm changing the way that I interact with people right now. Like, that's it. That point woke me up like nothing else. That was just this big aha moment. And ever since I've come back here, I remember that almost every day, and it helps me formulate how I interact with people every day. I'm very...
But see how intense that experience was? She got in an argument with her little sister, and she felt it from her little sister's perspective, and what a profound impact it had on her. I mean, not to downplay, I don't know the details of their argument, but in the overall scope of things, an argument with your little sister isn't like the biggest thing in the world. But imagine somebody who is really doling out pain to people, like you were saying, George, like a murderer, or like people that have done heinous, disgusting things, what their life review would feel like. If this experience, an argument with her little sister, caused this much of a profound change in her, what would like really bad shit feel like for people that have been really crappy? You know what I'm saying? So it's wild to me. And that's to your point, Ebba, where it's like things are magnified in that spiritual world. Like that the emotions are way more intense, you know?
Yeah.
What?
Concerned and...
Yeah, I got you.
I'm just... Why did it affect her that much? I'm guessing at this point that she just treated people like shit. She didn't care what she said to people. Obviously, when you're young, we all say stupid shit. Yeah. But it affected her this much where, like, at this, I'm assuming she's in her 40s, 50s, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, did she still treat people like shit and talk down to people? Is that why it affected her so much? I'm just kind of curious. I know you don't know the answer, but I'm just kind of curious why, like, any normal person should know. I mean, I shouldn't say normal, but anyone who has a good heart should know that if you say something bad to someone, like, oh, gee, that shirt looks shitty on you, obviously it's going to make you feel like shit. You know what I'm saying? I feel like that should be more common sense rather than, I mean, obviously I don't know her personally, but does she still treat people like shit where she's like, okay, now I know my words affect people? You know, what I'm trying to get at?
Well, Tonez, you're saying you have a good point, but dude, have you seen Tonez? I mean, you're on YouTube, bro. Have you seen all the shit people say online, dude? Like,
no, I know, but that's my question though. Like, she's an older woman, and is she still like? It seems like that affected her the most. Yeah. Was how, like, I've had dreams where I've woken up crying because I saw my grandma in a dream. Like, that affected me because I missed her, and she's passed on, but that affected me because I missed her. And waking up, like, I think about it sometimes, and it gets me sad. But when she's saying she had a experience where she felt that her words affected her sister, and she felt the pain that her sister was in after those words were said, and she remembers that a lot more than anything else that she just stated, or affected her the most in this state that she was in. So now that's my question. Like, does she still treat people like shit? Like,
Well, no, she said it changed her. When she came back, it changed her. She's really careful now. But that experience of feeling, the sister must have been more hurt than she let on to believe initially.
Right.
Is that-
So yeah,
Go-
OG, you know, you're right. And that's the thing is like that with these experiences, again, when they come back, it takes years for stuff to like, you know, settle in. You know, yeah, there's some points where, you know, they're like, holy shit, this and that. Like when Evan Alexander came back, he was still trying to medically, scientifically with his doctors figure out how the hell did I have this experience? There's no way that was possible, right? But these people come back and, you know, like, you know, earlier in the video, she said that she didn't want to come back. A lot of the times, these people don't want to come back, and they have kids, they have families.
I've heard that too by many people, where they do have their loved ones and everything, and that's the realism as opposed to what the realism is down here as to oppose is into the afterlife, is because we all miss the person that we lost, you know, because we're still here in the non-reality, so to speak. But when you do cross over those lines, people are like, the way that you feel, the way that it makes, you know, with of expression and everything, and then when you come back, you're like, damn, like why? Like, even though that you do love your family and everything, but it's like, in comparison, it's like, why would I want to be here where there's hurt, where there's pain, where there's, you know, it gives you, of what everyone else was describing, a very peaceful, tranquil kind of feel.
So here's something really interesting. While you guys were discussing, I just looked up dopamine receptors and how its relationship to anesthesia. So this is just a little bit of an excerpt, but dopamine receptors play a role in anesthesia and critical care medicine. They're involved in regulating consciousness during general anesthesia and promote emergence from anesthesia. Activating dopaminergic neurons may help induce consciousness in surgical patients. In other words, they use anesthesia to make you go unconscious, and then by playing with the dopamine receptors, they use that to make you conscious again. So dopamine really lines up with a lot of the emotive experiences that she's experiencing, like cognitive empathy, you know, being showered with love and understanding and things like that. That really, I don't think she's a bad person. I mean, like, even if you were a sociopath or a psychopath, you're not going to suddenly feel bad for mistreating your 6-year-old sister, because sociopaths and psychopaths, they don't have moral compass. They don't feel guilty. They don't feel remorse. That's why they're sociopaths and psychopaths. And there's no really amount of dopamine that I think the dopamine activation for those kinds of clinically insane people happen when they murder people, and not when that's the only way they get their dopamine. So, but yeah, it seems like there's a relationship between reactivating consciousness for somebody that's been anesthetically induced into unconsciousness and dopamine. So if like if these dopamines are getting dumped in order to bring this person back up, then that kind of correlates with like the qualia that this person is experiencing.
Interesting.
No.
Interesting.
But it's true. But it's true. This could last years, because if you got a dopamine dump from anesthesia, and let's say you have like a non-normative reaction to it because of like age or genetics or something like that, yeah, you could be like a really uber empathetic person for like the next 7 years, you know, just walking around and singing kumbaya, peace, love, and harmony. And that's some of the side effects of hallucinogenics as well. I mean, we saw that during the 1960s and the 1970s, you know, where everybody's like peace, love, and harmony, and you got to love one another and all that stuff. So a lot of the same similar side effects.
Yeah, that's true. Good point.
Careful about how I interact with people. All of a sudden, for the first time in my whole, you know, experience there, I looked up and there were clouds in the sky. And we were just kind of looking around, you know, like when you were little kids looking for animals up in the clouds. And so we did that for a while. And then she got up and she said, well, it's time for you to go now. I was not happy to hear that. I thought I had passed some kind of test, and was going to stay there. I was really planning on doing this end run around my teacher. I was like planning, can I just like run around her and just keep running until I find where I'm supposed to go? That was one of the things that I wanted to do. And I also thought, well, if I pitch a fit enough, they'll just let me stay.
Hey, OG, pause it real quick.
Getting a little.
Gotcha.
I think you were referring to this kind of like you were referring to this earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong if this is how you were interpreting it. Were you saying that because of the state that she is, that's the state that she's in physically, like she's, she was coding and all that stuff, that her brain was kind of protecting her from pretty much dying and putting her in this kind of state to keep her brain active and, keep herself alive? Is that what you were saying earlier, or did I hear that wrong?
Oh no, I didn't say it. Slimer, did you say, were you the one who said that about the?
You said something about your brain. You said something about your brain kind of like filtering or.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. What I meant by that was actually, your brain is like a filtration device where it's almost like it dumbs down the consciousness, and when your consciousness is free from the physical brain, it's unleashed, and it's more free and more more intense. So the brain sort of keeps it kind of tampered down because you're in this physical world. But when it's released from your physical body and your brain, it kind of goes out into the spirit world and goes nuts with it. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. So which she said kind of made me think of like, it sounds like her brain could be like, self-consciously protecting her for being in this state to keep it active, to stay alive, because she was coding. And that's kind of how I kind of read what she was saying. And then now her brain's telling her she's ready to go. She's ready to go back, and then that's her coming back to life. That's kind of how I think about it.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's why I love this stuff, because it's crazy to think about, like, what's going on here, right? Is it something going on spiritually, or is it really just like chemical
thing?
Right. Is this chemical soup in your brain basically just causing you, what is happening here? That's why it's just fascinating.
And real quick, OG,
weepy with
gotcha.
And that's why I think that even now, we're currently having more seriousness discussion in the scientific community about this, because there is a phenomenon happening, right? This is a real phenomenon that's happening. Now, what is it exactly? We don't know 100% for sure, right? And that's the hard part, Slimer, like what you were saying, is that if you're studying a consciousness that is like, let's say it's not, because the whole thing with neuroscience, right? And the neuroscience community is that the brain produces consciousness, right?
Right.
But this phenomenon says differently. At least to me, it says differently. This tells me that that the brain does not produce consciousness. So there's conflicting. So people are having conflicting experience stories than from what is currently publicly believed by the scientific community.
Right.
And so to me, that's very fascinating, because I think that this is a scientific, this is a phenomenon, and I want science to take this more seriously, and they're starting to.
Right.
But I just wish that for the past 30, 40 years, this wasn't such a mumbo jumbo thing that they just kind of passed off.
Yeah. Well, another interesting thing too with this whole thing is that for anyone to tell this story, to have an NDE, they have to come back. So. Yeah. That's the thing. Like, does this experience go on and on and on forever? Or is this just like when you die, the immediate time right after dying, right? Where it's like.
And that's what we don't know, OG, because all the experiences, because they come back, we only know that kind of starting to midpoint section. We don't know the final crossing, right?
Exactly. And the consciousness thing is crazy, because like, I agree with you guys. I mean, I think you mentioned it too, Slimer, earlier on in the show, where like, we don't know anything about consciousness. We really don't. We don't know. I mean, a lot of these stories defy that. defy at least our current understanding of what consciousness is and where it originates from. Now, that doesn't confirm an afterlife necessarily, but I don't think we don't understand, like in the science community, they don't understand even this much of it. Like not even 1% of what this whole thing is about.
With her. So at that point, she laid hands on my shoulder that was broken, my ribs, and right up here, because the top of my sternum was the part that was cracked. And then she sort of sent me back. And I woke up in the recovery room. I was actually screaming when I woke up. I was yelling, and I was not happy. I was really angry to be back. And the nurse who was helping me, she literally jumped back. But I kept yelling, "Where is she? Where is she? I don't want to be here. Can I go?"
You know, it's weird to me. I hear this a lot with near-death experiencers, where it's like they're very angry to be back, right?
Yeah.
But you just experienced what it was like to die, basically, right? Essentially. And so you know you're going to die again. Like, you're not going to be here forever. You're not being banished to Earth forever. Like, eventually you're going to die and you're going to go up there again. So why the stress out? Why so stressed out about coming back?
Well, I have an answer for you. And this is just a guess. My guess is being back now in the physical body, you're now having that kind of human biological way of thinking now, right? And I mean, look, she had a death experience, came back, she's in the hospital, and it's kind of like if you pull George out of Disneyland, George just pulled him out, and now he's kicking and screaming,
Exactly.
Go back. Can I go back? And they thought I was having some kind of psychotic episode, I'm sure. The anesthesiologist came in and talked to me a little bit. He got me calmed down. But I kept asking, I said, "Can you please send her back to me? Can you please send her back to me?" And they had no idea who I'm talking about. I had a friend in the waiting room. So they went and got her, and I feel so bad for her. So they brought her in, and I said, "That's not who I'm talking about. I don't want to see her. I want to see the woman I was with during surgery." And they're like,
you know what I think is so kind of ironic, that she just went through like a life experience of like talking about her sister, and she comes back and she's like, "I don't want to see her. Like, get her out of here."
Exactly. I was just gonna say that, George. I was just gonna say that. Like, Tonez, you were saying, like, how does she treat people now? She's not even back for 5 minutes, and she's already treated her friend like shit. It's
wild. What is going on? So finally, I realized, well, okay. Then my rational mind kicked in, and I remembered everything that happened, but I thought, okay, you need to shut up, because they don't get it. They don't understand what you went through. So I just stopped talking.
She's trying to figure out a way
I was
so
in a
she
Lutheran
can die
hospital,
again, to feel it again.
And the next morning, one of the chaplains stopped in for the hospital. She poked her head in, like, "You awake?" And I could tell who it was. And I said, "Oh, thank God you're here," out loud. And she came in, and we talked about what happened. She was amazing. She was really amazing. If she hadn't reacted in the positive way that she had, I may never have told anybody ever again. But she was very accepting, very positive, and explained that I had died.
And so that's going back to what I was saying, was there's still, even though it's becoming more accepted, there's still a lot of acceptance of this phenomenon happening. People are still being called loonies, crazies, you're delusional or whatever, and just kind of passing it off. When I really think this is a serious subject to be researching and looking into, because here's the thing. Not only is this like an amazing frontier to explore, but this also concerns everybody. Everybody fucking dies, So whether you're pretty, ugly, rich, poor, wherever you are, whatever skin color you are, everybody's going to die at some point. So in my opinion, this should be a pretty big thing to be researching and looking into.
Oh, 100%. And we can all have opinion on like what it is, whether it's just the physical brain, dying and going through a crazy, transition, or whether it's God or a spiritual thing. But these things are happening. So it's interesting to see, like, to your point, Webba, like let's look into this. Like, what's causing all this shit, right?
My question is why do we have to know what it is? Like, what is I mean, we're most likely never going to know what the technical term of what these people are experiencing are, but why do we have to? You know what I'm saying? Why does there need to be an answer to something like this? Because what if it is spiritual and we're never going to know? Like, I don't know. I'm kind of curious on why.
That's a great question, Tonez. Go ahead, Webba.
No, I'll tell you why. Just out of simple fact of like the curiosity about the nature of reality. For me, that's what it is. I want to know how the nature of reality, consciousness, and existence works and how it functions, and where we fit into the entire system, where we come from, where are we going after this, why are we here, who created the solar system, the universe, right? That's for me, that's like not only a personal curiosity, but it also goes on the frontier of discovery, exploration, within consciousness and reality. But also I want to know scientifically of how that understanding of that reality works. So like, we have physicists, we have engineers who, develop, study, physics and whatnot, right? And they study the nature of our physical material world. And that's awesome, right? We learn how our planet works, how the solar system works. I want to know how all that works on the next level of the afterlife. So that's my answer.
I mean, I get that, but to me, it just I don't see a clear answer ever happening because of how there's just no proof that they can show me where, for one, I will understand, but for two, unless I see physically, like let's say God, for instance, like unless I see this happening, I don't know if I would be able to believe it. I could, I just don't know that answer.
And that's fair, Tonez. That's a completely fair thing, because this is something where it's not even like the universe. Like the universe, we can send, telescopes out and spaceships out and actually explore the physical universe, right? We can get some answers with that. With the afterlife, someone has to die to do this. And then and they have to die long enough to really, you know what I'm saying?
And that goes right back to like the different layers of how things, like my experience might be different from Tonez, might be different from Ebba's, might be different from Slimer's. So to kind of cap it off, to say like it's only one thing, I feel like it's not going to be one thing and no one would ever really know. That's like, I can give my assumption what I believe, you guys can give your assumption what you believe, but at the end of the day, do we really know what it is? Because if we just go by this woman alone, this was her personal experience. Now we do see similarities like with other people, but at the end of the day, is it going to be exactly what they're saying? It may be something completely different for all of us. And that's why it's fascinating. I love like listening to other people's stories and everything. But like at the end of the day, based off of my belief, I feel like I know where I'm going at the end of my life. So that's why I just go back to Disneyland.
So I have a question for you, right? Because obviously all these people, like I said, have effects. And then after that, they pretty much live their life in the way that they know of what they learned and experienced in these NDEs, right? So you're saying, well, what's really the point? Well, let me ask you this question. Would you live your life differently or have a different perspective if we in the material world scientifically had concrete proof that we still continue after death?
No, because
probably not. No.
For me, no, because I know what I believe in, of like how I was raised and what I was brought up on and how I wanted to continue my life as an adult. So of what might work for me might not work for somebody else. And that's perfectly fine. What might work for somebody else may not work for me, that's fine. And that's why I feel like when it is all our time, we're all going to have a different scenario. But then just to say, God forbid, knock on wood, it really was your time and you're not coming back. well, you're up there, or you're out there, so you're not being able to come back to give your experience, because once you're there, you can't transfer information
Right.
back.
And that's the hard part about studying this stuff, is like I was telling you a few minutes ago, where like you can do the universe thing. You can send out physical, telescopes and ships and all that, but with the death experiences, if you're dead, you're dead. You don't come back, we're not going to hear your story, and so it's interesting. It's interesting. And you're right. I mean, these experiences, if it is a spiritual experience, will be customized. I think a lot of that, when we hear about like these different like tiers, like she was talking about how like, she was in this one tier with the grassy knolls and the beautiful trees and all that, but there's another tier that you go up to. I think that tier that she's in with the grassy knolls and what have you, we've heard that a lot from other near-death experiencers. And I think that's completely, like you guys were saying, customized and created as a transitionary sort of thing. Because you're coming from Earth, and they're trying to ease you into that spiritual world. So they have to combine the two. They have to kind of give you a little bit of that earthly stuff, so you feel kind of cozy and kind of ease you into that full-on spiritual situation. But again, that's just speculation. Who knows?
All I will say is, like, based off of like what we've watched and what we kind of researched and other videos that I had watched, I will say it all kind of goes, and that's why I gave the assumption, like with the customized tier system. But at the same time, I will say the way that it sounds so much better than the tier system of the Magic Keys.
Yeah.
Actually, I have two questions for Slimer. First question: do you think Walt Disney is still in the afterlife, and he made a Walt Disney World afterlife theme park? And so what was my other fucking question? I fucking forgot.
Before Slimer answers that is really interesting. Like, if you take Walt and put him in this scenario, like, I wonder like what his life in review would be like, and like what he actually saw, because he was a visionary on Earth. So I could imagine what how he was in the afterlife. And even like, obviously they're still here with us, but like even like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and James Cameron, like, I mean, these are like top-notch visionaries. I feel like they use more of percentage of their brain than any of us put together. So it makes me wonder, in a subconscious standpoint, what their lives would be like in an afterlife. But Slimer, go ahead. I do apologize.
What was the question?
Oh yeah. So I remember the second question. The first question is, do you think Walt Disney in the afterlife has built a Walt Disney World or Disneyland theme park in the afterlife? And and two, do you think the realm of psychedelics could actually help a lot with the studies of consciousness for maybe a glimpse into the afterlife?
Well, that second one's a good question. The first one, George has already answered that. But when it comes to psychedelics, facilitating new imaginative ways to try to approach the problem of consciousness and its relation to the physical world, and to try to better understand what it means to be unconscious and to experience death. There's a lot of new information that's come out of psychedelics. First and foremost, the scientist that won the Nobel laureate for discovering DNA, he discovered it because he was tripping on LSD. The remarkable similarities between the Earth's mycelium network and the brain's neural network, that was discovered by a guy that was tripping on mushrooms. And that actually correlates a lot with the experiences that these people experience when they have these NDEs. So like the mother talking to them, giving them guidance, walking them into a garden. Like, is it a coincidence that these people have near-death experiences, basically talk to Mother Nature for all intents and purposes, because they're in a garden and they're being spoken to like this very loving, nurturing thing? I mean, think about it. As a human that has evolved millions of years on Earth, right? We've biologically come up on this Earth for millions of years. What is comfortable and cozy to us is nature. Just go out into nature like any given day when it's nice and sunny and the sun's hitting your skin and you're absorbing all the vitamin D. It feels good. Why does it feel good? It's because you evolved to absorb what nature has to offer you. Everything that we need comes from the ground. And so I think there is a relationship between the mycelium network of Earth and humans. And I think that we are descendants of it. And because we're descendants of it, when we become very introspective, like let's say on hallucinations or hallucinogens or some kind of near-death experience, I think we experience our most like natural state, and we almost like reconnect to Mother Earth in a very profound way. I mean, it's a stunning experience. I think it's very complex. I don't think we understand the wholeness of it, but that's another thing that hallucinogenics has helped us challenge and be pretty successful with. I mean, these are ideas that we would have never come up with just drinking whiskey. Like there had to be a little bit more involved in trying to come up with these crazy ideas. But I do think that hallucinogenics do facilitate. I mean, shit, man. Like even some of the best scientists of the 18 and 1900s were really making a lot of breakthroughs in different disciplines of empirical science. They were all on drugs, man. And I'm not saying like you should go do drugs because it's going to make you the next greatest scientist. But the reality is that it opened up neural networks and did things in the brain that allowed people with special reasoning capabilities in either mathematics or philosophy or whatever to come up with ideas that they wouldn't have come up with otherwise if they weren't like huffing glue. And it's just weird. I mean, it's bizarre, but it's true.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Now, I never did any drugs, but I will say the night I came up with OT55, I had about 6 Coronas. So,
can I tell a quick story? And it's to Webba's point, because he mentioned earlier in the episode or earlier in the show that a lot of cultures use hallucinogenics for, whatever they use them for. But there's a documentary that I just watched last week. It was about a plane that crashed. It was like it was holding like 10 people or whatever. It was a plane that crashed and in Colombia, and they believe the children that were in that plane ended up surviving. They were in the forest or the jungle for like 40 days. Some of the locals who were familiar with the jungle were in there, as well as helping the military that was in there, helping find these children. And there was evidence, there was bottles and diapers found around the jungle that indicated that these kids were still alive. And the military ended up leaving after, I think it was like 30 or 40 days, because they just couldn't do it anymore. So the locals stayed and to keep trying to find these kids. And after a certain amount of time, the chief of this search party and of the I don't know if it was a tribe but this group of people, they said for the jungle to speak to them, and that was them taking whatever hallucinogenic it was that they ended up taking. But they were going to determine if they were going to continue the search party or not, just by taking this, I believe it was like a tea that they turned it into. And they said they were either going to pack up tonight or search one more day tomorrow. And then they took it. He said, we'll search one more day. Whatever he saw indicated that they were going to search for one more day. And that same day, they ended up finding these 4 kids that were in the forest for 40 days, and they were alive. And if they would have found them anytime after that, they would have been dead. They would have been dead for sure.
That's amazing, dude.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy, Tones, right? Because we have, from what I'm hearing, and Webba, you could probably confirm this. You study this stuff a lot, where we only use like 10% of our brains, right? Pretty much. Very small amount of our brains. It's interesting with these hallucinogenics and all that stuff, how I think it sort of it like taps into your brain. It makes, basically, you probably use a bigger percentage of your brain on that shit. And it just opens up pathways you could never do on your own. You know what I'm saying? So people use this stuff and it just enlightens them like crazy. Can you imagine if we actually had 100% use of our brains, like what we could do?
I think I'm using 10% and I have a headache every day, so I can't imagine if I can handle it.
You know what I'm saying, dude? Oh,
But
we could probably like force push it and fucking like literally
Yeah.
like, with our minds and crap, you know?
Yeah, in all seriousness, yeah, that would be. I couldn't imagine what would go on in some people's brains, especially if they're using 100% of it.
Which actually, speaking of which, and I even kind of joked about it when I mentioned about Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and James Cameron. Like they're visionaries, but they use it through like a filmmaking way. But if you really look at, and I'm gonna like nerd it out here in a way, but if you actually look at the story of Star Wars, like when they talk about like midichlorians and like the power of the Force and everything, to think that George Lucas came up with that kind of stuff just out of a whim, like to not. Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
I don't know. I don't think you know what I'm trying to say here, George.
Yeah.
Dune, the movie Dune, or the book Dune came out before Star Wars, and it has a lot of similarities to that. So I think that inspiration came from that. Not saying George Lucas didn't.
Even George Lucas as a kid, when he would listen to like the radio, he would listen to the radio, like the serial episodes of like superheroes and stuff like that. So I mean, yeah, everything gets referenced to something, but no matter what, how you look at it, I'm just saying, like, for someone to come up with
absolutely.
I feel like that there could be something even more to that, because we don't know how they are in their personal lives, of what they experienced maybe as they were a child growing up or what have you, and they kind of enforced it in their filmmaking and storytelling. We really don't know. Even take Walt Disney. I feel like there's certain people that were on this earth that is just like way beyond other people, like how their brains function. Like for instance, like me, like I could never see myself functioning like a Walt Disney or a George Lucas or something like that. Like I have creative ideas, but I don't think I would ever be on that scope. And I think it's just so interesting how one person's brain can be kind of, I don't want to say superior, but it could be utilized to its strengths than another.
Yeah. They're tapped into something. They're more evolved. You know, go ahead, Slimer. Sorry about that, brother.
No, you're good. Well, what I was going to say is we actually use 100% of our brain, but we only use about 10% of the neurons in our brain at the same time. So it could be that these people have the ability to use upwards of 20% of the neural activity in their brain simultaneously, which allows them to have either more creative, thoughts or solve problems that other people can't solve because they're too complex. But a lot of the times, these are like high functioning autistic people. Isaac Newton was highly functional autistic. Immanuel Kant, I think, Albert Einstein. We know Stephen Hawking had some kind of thing going on too. But the ability to be able to focus on one subject matter for literally decades, almost your entire life, is something that is requisite in order to solve complex problems when it comes to science and philosophy. And a lot of these people really don't have normal lives because of that. Like Isaac Newton never got married. The guy co-founded calculus and the theory and physics. You know what I mean? Like, what kind of a life do you have if you're so focused on physics and calculus? You don't, because you're creating it. And same thing with a lot of great thinkers. They have the ability to focus on one subject without it making them bored, without being distracted from it. It's all they want to do. And it's almost like not even passion, it's obsession, but it's not like a sickly obsession, because they're actually productive with the information, and it impacts things like, science and our worldview.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, boys, I think we're gonna call it right, this video. Thank you so much, you guys, for joining on this video. This, like, I mean, we love theme parks and Disney, stuff like that, but stuff like this, like, near-death experiences, the afterlife, aliens, dreams, psychedelics, all this stuff is super fascinating for me. I'm so happy to have all you boys join me today. So thank you so much.
Yeah. But real quick, I had, when I started this channel in 2016, I think like a year after I started the channel, I started a series of videos called Curiosity. And they're still on the channel. There's like 4 of them, 4 videos I think on there. But like, I would dive into this shit. I'd talk about dinosaurs, the afterlife, the universe, all kinds of stuff. I love this stuff, man. If you got anything like this, just throw it my way, dude. We'll make video after video on it. I'm all on. I'm all in, dude. I'm all in.
Perfect. Well, Tonez, thank you so much, brother, for joining me today and the panel. Could you please let everybody at home know where they can find Sexy Tonez Papi?
Sexy Tones. Every gangster needs a forehead kiss, bro.
Exactly. Well said, OG. Thank you for having me, guys. Always a pleasure talking to you. Slimer, we need to do another video sooner than later, all right?
Yes.
But yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Yeah, you can find me at Tonez_TV on TikTok and X. Go to my YouTube channel, Bad Thoughts Studio, where we do movie, TV show, trailer breakdowns. You guys can also go to my podcast on YouTube and Spotify, which is Bad Thoughts Podcast. And we do game nights. We talk about a bunch of dumb stuff. So if that interests you, go over there.
Yeah, hey, everybody go support Tonez Papi. He does amazing work over there at Bad Thoughts Studio, the Bad Thoughts Podcast. Him and Candy Camper, family here on OG55, and they do great stuff. So make sure you support them. And we're on their channel all the time, so you can check out the OG crew over there too. So show them some love. Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tonez. Sexy Slimer, sir, thank you for joining us today. Where can everybody find you at home on social media?
Yeah, you can find me on X at SlimeSquare84, where I talk theme parks, Ghostbusters, anything else that I'm interested in. And you can find me on Orange Grove 55, where we primarily talk movies and theme parks.
There we go.
Perfect. Absolutely. OG, the man, the myth, the legend. Legend. 11. Wow, I can't even fucking talk. Legend. Thank you for joining today. Where can everybody find you at home on social media?
Would you say I'm that guy?
Oh my God, I'm really that guy.
No, always an excuse to have a drop. You know what I'm saying? Always an excuse. But you can find me here on Orange Grove 55. You can find me on Instagram, Orange Grove 55. You can find me on X, Orange Grove 55. And Webba, fantastic job hosting, sir. Amazing episode. I love this stuff, man. So
Yeah,
cool
done,
conversation.
Well done.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Now, George, the Italiano, sir, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can everybody find the Italiano at home on social media?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me on, Webba, and for this almost 2-hour episode. Now, my ass is flatlined. It is now in the afterlife going through review as we speak.
Awesome. That's absolutely awesome.
But in any case, you can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Disney George. You can also find me on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky under the Disney Italiano. And of course, you can find me right here on my home base on Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner, with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info. And you could also check out my new YouTube channel, Citrico Central, sister channel to Orange Grove 55.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, that's it for today. Let us know in the comments below what you think of the video. Are you interested in afterlife or near-death experiences or consciousness? Let us know. We'd love to discuss. Anyways, have a good one.
Snapping shot. Thank you for watching OG55. If you aren't already, consider becoming a member today.